Thank you everyone for inviting me to give this talk. So the talk I will give today is based on a paper that I wrote during the summer after the presentation, the talk I gave in Poland at Philong. So it was quite like an inspiring atmosphere there, and we talked a lot. And this topic of concepts and conceptions coming back again, and I thought it would be nice to write something on it. I didn't really work when I finished this paper. It was like beginning of September, and it seems like a century has passed since since the beginning of September and now. So excuse me if I get a little bit lost in some of the ideas, but hopefully it's going to go smoothly. So here we go. Right, so topic. Well, coming from philosophy of language into conceptual engineering, there are some kind of topics that keep on coming, like from very early on, and I've been thinking about concepts and conceptions, like in general, with regards to the work that I've been doing on context sensitivity and so on for years, and I think the distinction is also quite relevant in this context. So I mean, general questions that I ask myself and that I think that people who work on conceptual engineering should ask themselves is first of all, you know, how shall we understand this distinction? Is it useful in general to make it? And what is the impact of this distinction on conceptual engineering and on the work that we would like to do in this kind of within this methodology? Personally, I mean, I think the distinction is important, so that will also be part of the argument today. But I come from a pluralist kind of background or outlook. I have defended pluralism in some publications as well, and for me also, it's the question arose. So if I'm a pluralist, what am I talking about? Am I talking about the pluralism of concepts, or am I talking about the pluralism of conceptions, or something else, right? So that, for me, that was the main motivation to kind of go deeper into this topic. And also when you, I mean, I'm not like a deep into conceptual engineering as some of you may be, but what I noticed is that not many people talk about this conception in the conceptual engineering literature, about this distinction, sorry. So mostly I noticed that it's talked about in the context of semantic externalism, and especially the question, to what extent is the semantics of concepts in our control or not, right? Can we do something with the semantics? Can we engineer concepts at all or not, right? So then this distinction is brought into to say something what's in our control and what's not in our control. So my main aim today will be to give a revised or a new look, new outlook at the distinction between concepts and conceptions. And I'm going to try to do that by applying Chomsky's distinction between scientific and ordinary concepts. I've been recently working more on Chomsky. I mean, I've always had an interest in connecting Chomsky and Wittgenstein, kind of unlikely marriage. But I think also Chomsky has interesting things to say that pertain to the distinction between concepts and conceptions, or at least kind of can be used to refine some of the views that are there in the literature. And I'm also going to briefly show how this revised distinction features in conceptual engineering projects. So The roadmap, very quickly, is I'm going to first of all look at the distinction in the literature on conceptual engineering so far, and my main focus will be on Sarah Sawyer's discussion of this distinction. Then I'm going to move on, move back a little bit, talking about this distinction as it appears in the theory of concepts. So that's like early 80s, and particularly Georges Rey, who is the kind of father, I don't know how to call him, of this distinction in a theory of concepts or cognitive science more generally. And we'll see, I want to zoom in here to show that the distinction is primarily motivated by the semantics or meta-semantics of natural kind concepts. And it's one of its motivations is to keep the epistemology and metaphysics separate. Then I'm going to go and talk about Chomsky and how he reacts to kind of these externalist arguments and what he says about the distinction between scientific and common sense or ordinary concepts. And I'm going to review some of his arguments against generalized referentialism. And then I'm going to show how I think Chomsky can be applied to the distinction between concepts and conceptions. I'm going to help myself with Fodor's model of mental files. So I'm not going to go deep into Fodor, but I think it's a useful kind of model or analogy to use in this context to kind of bridge Chomsky and the talk of concepts in conceptual engineering. And then I'm going to finally say how this revised distinction that I want to put forward applies to, or how it can be useful to conceptual engineering projects. So the distinction kind of appears implicit and explicitly in literature that you guys are familiar with. So from Burgess, here is the quote. So what are we engineering? What are we, busy with in this new methodology, right? So he says, many people involved in conceptual engineering distinguish concepts from beliefs. Many others also include conceptions as part of the picture here. How exactly are these and related things distinguished? How should they be distinguished? If the answers here turn out certain ways, then perhaps many instances of conceptual engineering turn out not to be about engineering concepts at all, but rather about something else. Similar kind of thing, appealing to a difference that or distinction that should be made, we find in Capellan's book. So he says, speakers can be deeply committed to all kinds of false beliefs about Fs and still be competent users of F. One way to articulate this proposal is that someone's conception of F, say freedom, can be inconsistent, even though the concept isn't, right? So here as well, we seem to have the distinction between concepts and conceptions implicitly endorsed or appealed to, right? So that our conceptions about a concept, about what a concept is, may be inconsistent, while the concept itself is unaffected by this. The far most developed proposal on concepts and conceptions that I found in this literature, and I'm not like a great expert on conceptual engineering literature, so if you have others that you would like to share with me, I would love to hear them, other suggestions. But I think kind of this gives the most kind of state-of-the-art view on the distinction in this sort of literature. So I'm just going to briefly go over Sayer's position, so which I'm sure you're familiar with. So according to her view, words have linguistic meanings. So they have meanings and they express concepts, where meanings and concepts are different things. So linguistic meanings are understood to be kind of uses, right? So Wittgensteinian kind of stuff. And she distinguishes between individual uses and communal uses. Then totally another thing is a concept that is expressed by a word. So the concept of F, so we can think of it along the lines of Fodorian mental representation. So I'm already trying to kind of forge the connection with the model that I want to use. But I think it's fair to apply that here. So we can think of them in a guise of mental files. Now, for Sawyer, there are also conceptions, right? So concepts are one concept is one thing, and a conception is another thing. So that conception marks a belief that we might have about the concept of F, or what the concept is about, right? So, or in any kind of information that we might have about the concept. So these are kind of memos in Fodorian speech, right? And she also, on this level, she also distinguishes individual beliefs and communal beliefs, right? And conceptions, I think that's an interesting connection here, right? Conceptions, so these beliefs that we might have about the thing the concept is about, actually determine linguistic meanings, right? Or how we use words. So there is this kind of close connections between our beliefs about something and the meanings of the words, of our words, right? And there is an individual level, and there is this more communal level, right? So I mean, this is a simplified story of her approach, but hopefully I'm not being unjust here in any sense. So what is the upshot of this? Well, that we can have the concept expressed by the word whale, right? And that one will always remain the same, and is always the same, and has always been the same. Nothing changed there. So it's externally determined, whereas conceptions that we have of what a whale is, whether it's a fish or a mammal or whatever, you know, they can change over the time. But the concept always has this kind of Fodorian mind-independent externalist metasemantics. Then in a recent paper that I also discuss in my paper, right? So recent Sawyer's paper on pluralism, obviously something I'm very interested in. So she develops a more sophisticated kind of account or outlook on this distinction by kind of trying to distinguish the metasemantics of broadly natural kind concepts and the metasemantics of social kind concepts. I mean, I'm a little bit simplifying here. So Sawyer is saying a little bit something more complex, but in a sense, there is like in general metasemantics of natural kind concepts such as water or gold is what she terms world to mind, right? So basically kind of Kripke and Putnam style externalism. And that means that we have no control over this. I mean, the regular story that goes with this, right? So semantics is not revisable. The entire community could be mistaken about the semantics of any natural kind terms, right? On the other hand, she now also introduces a different sort of semantics. So it's not that all our concepts have externalist semantics or this kind of Putnam-Kripke style externalist semantics, right? Direct referentialism. But there are concepts such as game, juice, or marriage. So these are her examples that have the other kind of direction of semantics, mind to world. So this kind of is there to accommodate internalist approaches or Bird style social externalism, so where we don't have this kind of direct reference between like a concept or and what's out there and an object or property, right? So important thing here for concepts and conceptions is that the semantics of these concepts ultimately depend, or in a quote she says they, so these kinds of concepts that have this kind of meta semantics ultimately depend for their individuation on our associated communal conceptions, right? So it is conceptions that now play a major role in determining what these concepts mean, right? And there is no mind independent or external property that determines what Jews or marriage are. They're all practice bound. Now, she also makes a kind of classification, further classification, right? So some of them, like marriage, are more externally anchored to institutional practices, right, than others, such as game or Jews, right? So the former will also be more difficult to kind of engineer, right? We have less control kind of over them, but not in principle like that we don't have control, like what's the case with natural kind concepts, right? So what's the upshot of this? Well, the concepts and conceptions distinction seems to be primarily relevant for natural kind terms, but not so much anymore for social kind terms. And that also opens up different kind of prospects and different modes, if you like, of engineering these different kinds of concepts, right? So the natural kind concepts are like old school, right? So they are, because of their world to mind meta semantics, they're out of bounds, right? So the only thing that we can hope to engineer or revise there are our conceptions. And we do that, right? So we within science, so we aim to maximize truth. We move towards a more correct conception, right? We want to improve our conceptions to get closer to the kind of correct representation, correct belief, right, about the reference of that concept. So this is a quote from Sawyer. The possibility of future revision remains forever open, but improvement measured in terms of truth is the aim, right? So there is this kind of improvement line, progress with our conceptions. With the other kinds of concepts, so social kind concepts, they give us much more control over their semantics, right? So because there is no such thing as Jews or no such thing as marriage out there, right? This kind of external yardstick, in a sense, there is no kind of correct or incorrect or getting better or getting worse in some kind of objective, mind independent way. But I mean, of course, there is better or worse, but these are all purpose relative now terms, right? So it's better in moral terms, or it's better in political terms, or whatever, right? But it kind of is anchored to what we deem better or worse in a particular kind of language game. So what we see is that this conceptual distinction is mainly upheld by natural kind concepts. And there is this implicit kind of assumption that the English words such as water, right, or tiger, gold, right? I mean, this together with old school people, that they express a natural kind concept. And that will be important for kind of the argument that I want to mount. Right. So now turning on to the history, and I mean, not just because it's a history, but I think some of these arguments that are not worked out yet in conceptual engineering literature can be found, right? So they happened in another kind of context. So we can learn from that, I think. So I think the discussion on concepts and conceptions went a little bit further in cognitive science, or in this kind of theory of concepts, in early and mid 80s than it is at the moment. But again, you know, like I can stand corrected on that afterwards. So, and also when you look at Array's work, it's clear that the motivation comes from natural kind concept, and the motivation is also very much the connection of all this talk to science, or natural science in particular. So it's also clear that the distinction between concepts and conception is rooted in this attempt to distinguish epistemology and metaphysics. So what I learned like years ago when I was a graduate student from Georges Ray, in that context, it's epi-meta distinction. And, you know, like you really don't want to not observe this distinction. And they also offer many arguments why it's, well, for the idea to keep metaphysics and epistemology of concepts separate, right? So there are arguments that we can also help ourselves with nowadays, I think, or at least if we disagree with the distinction, we should at least have a look at those arguments. So Ray introduces this distinction in the context of arguing against the prototype theory of concepts. And he thinks, I mean, his main kind of accusation there is that the prototype theory of concepts fails to observe this epi-meta distinction, which he thinks ought to be observed. And he mounts like loads of well, I don't know, you know, convincing or not, but in his main claim is that prototypes or exemplars and the like are not concepts, but they're conceptions. There are conceptions. They're part of our beliefs about things, and they're not like necessarily the concepts of them. And here it is very kind of quickly why that's not so. So prototypes, he says, are not always the best guide as to what a thing really is, and the consequence of that is that the scientific inquiry may be hindered, right? So for instance, whales fit our prototype of fish very well, but they're not fish, and tomato doesn't fit our prototype of fruit, but it is fruit. Another thing, they're not stable enough, right? So prototypes vary very much between different persons, right? And within the same person, right? So he says any two people who use different procedures, or one person who uses different procedures at different times, would ipso facto have different concepts, right? So that's kind of an unwanted thing here, according to Ray. So he's also anticipating what in this literature is known as Strawson challenge, right? So not just any change in a belief about how you tell whether something satisfies a concept, or to count as a change in that concept, right? So he wants to put a stop to, hey, if you take prototypes and the like to be the only concept, right, then we are off to the races. Then every change in belief will be a change in concept. And finally, very, I think, important class of arguments that come kind of from Fodor is that these are prototypes are not compositional. So think of pet fish, arguments and so on. Ray has I'm going to read the quote briefly. I'm also looking at the time. The way people decide whether something is a tropical fruit may be arbitrarily different from the way they decide whether something is tropical and the way they decide it is a fruit, for the simple reason that what is typical of tropical fruit depends not on what is typical of tropical and typical of fruit, but on what fruit is typically found in the tropics, right? So that kind of resembles the Fodor and Lepore's pet fish arguments, right? So according to Ray, the main function of concepts is to be about the world and how it divides up, not about how we might divide up our methods of investigating. So because of this kind of disconnection that happens between the epistemology and the metaphysics, we should kind of resist to epistemically construe concepts, right? So if we do that, then they cannot perform this function. Now, very briefly, to broaden up, so where is Ray situated, right? Where is his argument situated? Well, what again upholds the distinction between concepts and conceptions are these standard classic externalist arguments that are also motivated by intuitions concerning natural kind terms. Here is a quote from Ray. Kripke and Putnam argue for their view primarily on the basis of ordinary linguistic intuitions regarding natural kind terms, or terms that purport to refer to kinds of things that are the subject matter of some science, e.g. multiple sclerosis, acid, gold, tiger, right? So he's looking back at where is this distinction coming from? What is it motivated with? But then they also famously, right, broaden. It's not, they are motivated by intuitions about natural kind terms, but semantic externalism is much broader than that. So he also thinks, Ray thinks, following Putnam, I'm not going to read this quote, but it's quite classic, right? So that semantic externalism, as they want to defend it, holds for all kinds of concepts, not for just natural kind terms, right? So here is some example. I'm not going to read it out. The bottom line being that, again, English term water, right, expresses a natural kind concept, which refers to a natural kind H2O, which is a subject matter of chemistry, right? So, and there are loads of discussion in literature about this, to what extent this is correct or not. I'm going to continue. I'm not going to go into those arguments. One thing I'm going to look at is kind of Chomsky's response to this Kripke and Putnam style externalism, but for a reason, because I want to say something about natural kind, natural language terms in contrast with scientific terms. So this is, I think, a very nice quote from Chomsky that I want to read out to you. So he says, the referentialist doctrine is radically false. There are no expressions that pick out objects or things that are mind independent. That seems accurate for natural language, and I highlighted this for a reason. Many inquiries illustrate that even the simplest expressions have intricate meanings. It is doubtful that any satisfy the referentialist doctrine. Now, as I said, the highlight here is for a reason, and I'm going to soon say why. So we are focusing here on natural language terms, right? So for Chomsky, natural language semantics is not externalist, and it will never be. So English, ordinary English term water, that the word that we use when we talk to our, kids and colleagues, and, in a shop when we buy water and whatever, in ordinary communication, that does not refer to H2O. according to Chomsky. So he has in this New Horizons, but from an earlier paper, right, from 1995, he has this very kind of cute little argument, almost like a context shifting argument, right, contextualist argument, that what people call water is not H2O. So he says, like, imagine we have cup 1, right? We only have tap water in it. Cup 2, let's imagine in that water, right, I dip tea bag. Then imagine liquid that I pour out of the tap, but there is a reservoir in which a tea bag, not bad, but bag is dipped. And imagine a cup of pure H2O, right, with a tea bag. Now, intuitively, right, the first one will be happy to call water, right, for the ordinary purposes, right? The second one, even though it has the same kind of chemical structure as the first one, will not call water anymore because we know that there is a tea bag there. Also, the liquid in which this same tea bag is dipped, if it comes out of the tap, is water again, right? And a pure H2O with a tea bag is again a tea, not a water. So what Chomsky kind of wants to say here that well, he says whether something is water depends on special human interest and concerns. Now, if our concern is something to do with the structure of that liquid, right, of that substance, then we might change our judgments as to whether cup 1 is water, whether cup 2 is water, and so on, right? So depending on our interest, science being one of these kind of judgments will shift, but importantly, English water caters for all these interests, right? It's not just one single kind of, we just have to look at the structure, chemical structure of it that constitutes its meaning, but actually English is much kind of more, well, not just English, natural language in general, right? More flexible, caters for these different perspectives, which we then exploit in different, depending on kind of different projects that we might have, science being one of them. Here is the kind of key distinction that is important for, well, that is crucial for my argument that comes from Chomsky, right? So he thinks that there is like this ordinary, or he says also common sense concept water that is expressed by the natural language term water, and that's not the same as the scientific concept of H2O, right? So natural language terms express ordinary or common sense concepts, or I thought today, why not even say kind of natural concepts? Not to be confused with natural kind concepts, though. And technical terms express artificially created or engineered concepts. So, and of course, because, when we do, when we create technical terminology, we usually help ourselves with natural language. So there is a big chance of equivocation here, and that's arguably happening all the time in philosophy, well, according to Chomsky and Wittgenstein and many others. So we have these ordinary concepts expressed by natural language, and for Chomsky, these common sense concepts, right, he says, simply grow in the mind, much in the way that the embryo grows in a person, right? So it's very well, I don't want to say anything further. It speaks for itself, right? So we have natural language semantics that is kind of giving us these or affording these internally determined perspectives. So concepts, these ordinary concepts, should be thought of as kind of conglomerates of these different perspectives. I'll say more about it very shortly. On the other hand, technical concepts, and here we count scientific concepts as well, are for Chomsky social artifacts. And there's with stipulated semantics, right? So they are very different, and he goes even as far as to say that they are part of the science forming faculty, right? So not our natural language faculty, but they belong to a different, altogether different faculty. This is not so non-controversial thesis, though, but I think the split between common sense and technical, or common sense scientific, is something that is fine to make, right? Key thing here being that technical concepts are social artifacts, right? And then he'll say something about scientific concepts being special in that they do have externalist semantics. Right, so a little bit about what's this kind of semantics that natural language affords, right? So, and he talks about perspective. So let me read you a quote. The semantic properties of the expression focus attention on selected aspects of the world as it is taken to be by other cognitive systems, and provide intricate and highly specialized perspectives from which to view them, crucially involving human interest and concerns, even in the simplest cases, right? So there are these, every kind of lexical item comes with a certain kind of almost like a little net of perspectives, right? So abstract, concrete, animate, inanimate, container, structural, functional, right? So I'm not a linguist here, so those of you who are linguists in the audience, you can also push this further, help me, with, but these are some that are mentioned mostly in the literature. So kind of main case, they're usually, these perspectives are showcased in philosophy of language, in the literature that we tend to read, right, through the phenomenon of polysemy. So when I say she read a book, I'm thinking of a book as an information, right, as some kind of under this perspective of abstract. And when I say she burnt a book, I'm thinking of a book more as a, concrete entity. So I'm exploiting different perspectives of the ordinary concept of a book. And Chomsky also says that these sometimes, we have conflicting perspectives. So we can say she read the book and then she burned the book, right? And then she burnt it, right? So the concept here is at the same time highlighting both perspectives, and that's usually, taken as an argument against externalism. So there are these co-predication arguments, right? I'm not going to go into that. Now, what is important about technical and more specifically scientific concepts, that Chomsky says we have no intuitions. We should bear in mind we have no intuitions about technical concepts. No, we should have. There can be no intuitions about these notions, reference and denotation, just as there can be none about angular velocity or protein. These are technical terms of philosophical discourse with a stipulated sense that has no counterpart in ordinary language. So what Chomsky reminds us here, very in a kind of Wittgensteinian way, is that we should take care of that in philosophy. We design technical concepts that we think we talk about, and that we talk in a natural, we do talk in natural language, but our concepts are already kind of engineered. And then what's special about scientific concepts in particular is that they, according to Chomsky, they do have external semantics, right? And that comes not just, okay, so we're going to say these concepts have externals, that comes from their involvement in naturalistic inquiry. So, and this is the quotation that kind of motivates that. In the sciences, one goal is to adhere as closely as possible to the referentialist doctrine. Thus, in devising technical notions like electron or phoneme, researchers hope to be identifying entities that exist in the world and seek to adhere to the referentialist doctrine in using these notions. So how do these natural kind concepts bode in Chomsky's framework, right? What's their position? Well, you know, as just mentioned, they are, you know, they're part of natural science. They're defined and postulated within natural sciences. So insofar as natural science, right, aims to carve nature at its joints, provide the knowledge that does so, what counts as a natural kind concept is something for a natural science to say, not something for us philosophers or, you know, our intuitions to say whether, like, water refer or expresses a natural kind concept. So only those concepts that, quote, fall within explanatory theories of the naturalistic variety should be considered genuine natural kind concepts. And then, quote again, at least if natural kind concepts are the kinds of nature, the categories discovered in naturalistic inquiry. So it's not easy to kind of become a candidate for natural kind concepts, if you like. So those are only, they get their prospect from the potential integration into natural sciences, right? So as you can see here in this quote that I'm not going to read out to you, importantly, that's also kind of Chomsky famous for, like, intentionality, language speaking, human being, you know, these are not genuine natural kind concepts, because they're kind of not serious enough. They're not seriously yet integrated into natural science, right, into these explanatory models. Right, so I hope I'll fly through this. So just introducing a little bit of Fodor's story to help us to bridge kind of this talk, Chomsky's stuff with concepts and conceptions, and then moving on to conceptual engineering. So famously in LOT2, Fodor introduces this metaphor of concepts being like mental files, right? A concept is a mental file in a file cabinet, he suggests. So he says, like, we can think of this file as having a name or a label, right? So it says, like, mentalese for John. In that file, we can have memos, right? So we can have various beliefs about John, and these are our conceptions. And then we also have aboutness, right? What the file is about. In this case, it's the guy, real guy out there in the world named John. I think it's important also to say that Fodor is not saying that mental file story is married to externalism, even though he wants it cast in this way. But he says there are two ways of telling the story about files and file names. So you can think of file names, he says, as being constrained by these memos that it contains, or not. Right, so if you do think that it's constrained by memos, then you get some kind of version of semantic internalism, or some kind of story about community-based files and memos or whatever. Or if you think that they are constrained, they're not constrained by memos, then you tell some kind of externalist Putnam-Kripke story. So I want to say that we can use this mental file story that we find in Fodor, like in kind of Chomsky way, so we can revise it so that we have one model for scientific concepts and another model for common sense concepts, and I'm going to say also why. So first of all, mental files model for scientific concepts. So this is easy. This kind of maps very one-to-one onto what we just saw Fodor does. So let's say we take water as a scientific concept, like from chemistry, right? So it consists of a mentalese file name, memos, which is the information that science has, chemistry has about H2O, and then we also have, importantly, as Chomsky and Fodor both want, and Ray and Sawyer, there is the reference out there. There is H2O, something that ordinary concepts don't have. And why? Well, because natural science says it's out there, a good natural science. So do we want, right? So there is this kind of pool. Do we want the semantics of the scientific concept to be constrained by conceptions or not, right? Would that be a good kind of decision, right? Is that desirable? Well, that would mean kind of that layman and expert would have different concepts of H2O, right? Do we want that? Again, any change in belief would amount to a change in concepts, so something that Ray pointed out and that comes up in the guise of Strawson challenge as well. And then truths about H2O would be relative to our conceptions of H2O, which is, I think, highly undesirable, right? We don't want that. That we are equally, that people pre-modern chemistry are equally right about water as we are, as our science is. So kind of this is supported by a quote from Stainton. The whole idea of a scientific concept is to capture how things really are independent of us. So we don't want everything to be kind of reduced to conceptions. But then we have a mental file story also for ordinary concepts. So here we need to revise our Fodor model and we need to add a new structural feature. And I like to think of that kind of as partitions in this file. And I think the motivation for introducing partitions is to kind of capture or represent these perspectives, right, that Chomsky talks about, whilst at the same time not conflating perspectives with conceptions, with memos. So common sense concept on this approach would consist of a file name, what the file is about. It could have a reference, it doesn't have to be like a H2O, the real reference out there, like Sherlock Holmes is a reference of some file, right? It has some kind of aboutness. Importantly, it has partitions, right? So there is like cells, abstract, concrete, inside, surface, animate, inanimate, right? And then there are memos or conceptions, which are now sorted or filed in these partitions. So that on this approach, we have that the English term water expresses ordinary concept water that is partitioned in accordance with the perspectives that are afforded by its internal semantics. So here on this approach, semantics of ordinary concepts is very much structural, right? So it's not externalist in the way that there is an object out there, water, right, that our word or ordinary concept refers to, nor it's the belief-based, right? So it's not just like a congeries of beliefs that we might have currently about water. I'm going to skip this. We can come back to that. I think it's a very nice kind of also quote from Chomsky, but here's the revised conceptual concept and conceptions distinctions, right? So concepts are distinguished from conceptions also in my approach. There are scientific concepts, right, which have externalist semantics. This is desirable because, say, science aims at truth about natural kind. And of course, there is then a question, you know, like scientific, are they only natural science concepts, or can we also have other kinds of science that is similarly aiming at truth? On the other hand, we have these kind of common sense concepts, right, or ordinary concepts or natural concepts that are that have partitioned, well, that should be viewed as partitioned or structured conceptions, whose semantics is determined by this internal structure, and conceptions within those structures, right, can fluctuate, can change, while these internal walls, right, remain stable. We also have that the epi-meta distinction is preserved for scientific concepts, although it collapses in a sense for the other ones, unless we want to kind of give some kind of metaphysics of this internal structure. I don't know. I didn't think about this yet. And then we have that this structural element is still preserved or this stability, right? There is something even in common or ordinary concepts that is stable, right? Without kind of requiring externalism, something out there in the world. And I think this is the final kind of content slide, and then I'm going to conclude. Sorry about going over 5-10 minutes. So how does this kind of proposal to revise the concept and conceptions distinction maps onto the conceptual engineering? How can it help us in our attempts to do something in conceptual engineering? So let me compare what we have now to where we started, to Sawyer's pluralism, which I said is, I think, state of the art on this. So same as Sawyer, we have plurality of metasemantics on this approach. We also have plurality of conceptions, right? But what is new is that we also have a plurality, or at least duality of concepts, right? So we have these artificially created concepts where scientific concepts live, and these natural concepts or ordinary common sense concepts that are conglomerates of these perspectives and connected very closely to lexical items. And also new thing that we have, also we can think of plurality of partitions, right? So that the ways of filling conceptions, filing conceptions are also different for nouns and verbs, for instance. So not every concept will have the same kinds of partitions, right? That will also depend on whether it's like connected to nouns or verbs and so on. So scientific concepts are technical concepts, though they're artificially created and engineered. So how do we come to create the technical concepts? How do we, how do we get them, right? Well, by revising ordinary concepts, and that will involve topic change. So if you think that the ordinary concept is a kind of conglomerate of different perspectives, technical concepts is kind of a focus, singling out one cell, or saying like we want to focus on this will be what this word means from now on, right? So I think it makes sense as a view of how we come to create also technical vocabulary, right? And what we then attach to it. So we say, okay, so this is, well, it's a new concept, newly created concept. So if you think in water, like scientific concept of water or H2O, kind of derives from singling out a certain cell of the common concept, of the common sense concept water, right? So working out from that and kind of filling in with new information, this scientific concept. So if you like, you can think of technical concepts as being created by selective attention to a single cell or a couple of cells, right, in a partition. And the purpose plays an important role with technical concepts, also with scientific concepts, but not all are scientific, right? So you can think of legislation, policy, business, cooking, right? Whatever, right? So philosophy, we always have a particular purpose in mind, on the basis of which we want to kind of modify, right? The ordinary concept is not good enough, right? And topic change is kind of implied with that, although there is also a continuity insofar it comes from this, original partition in some sense. And I also want to point out that there is this also organic concept change going on. So not only we do things like by intentionally, right? So like we need to create a technical concept for the purpose of a law, right? Of a person, right? Technically, like we need a new concept of a person that will accommodate AI or whatever, right? So, but there is also organic concept change, right? According to which we, like, when we communicate, we might already kind of shifting ourselves, making some of ourselves more dominant than others, and maybe already accommodating, speaking of AI as a person, say, right? But I think it's important to distinguish this kind of organic, slow concept change and kind of this intentional or creating technical artificial concepts. Right. So finally, conclusion. So I think we can, as conceptual engineers, I mean, I don't know if I want to count myself there so much, but I do work on it, and I think we can profit from a better focus on this distinction. We can achieve more clarity about pluralism. We can have better understanding of scientific concepts, what they do, and naturalistic inquiry. So science itself on this approach is a form of conceptual engineering, right, that aims at truth about natural kinds. We gain better understanding of technical concepts in general. So also introducing any sort of technical concept is a form of conceptual engineering on this approach, and presupposes some degree of topic change. We also gain better understanding of ordinary or natural concepts and their semantics, and we also can realize, I think, that not every revision in conceptions, right, in our beliefs, need to amount to a concept change. Thank you, and sorry for such a long talk, but hope you enjoyed.